Joe Strasser is a one-of-a-kind jazz drummer known for his distinctive sound, deep musicality, and rock-solid time. A cornerstone of the New York City jazz scene, his playing can be heard on standout recordings like Up in Smoke and Still Smokin' with Ian Hendrickson-Smith and In Orbit with Planet Jazz. Drawing inspiration from masters like Jimmy Cobb and Philly Joe Jones, he combines a foundation and tradition with a thoroughly individual voice, making him one of the most respected and versatile drummers of his generation. And we are live. So, Joe, good to see you. Take two, right?
Hi, yes, Abe. Nice to see you too. Thanks for having me.
So we were just talking a little bit before we started recording, but I was really curious about, coming to New York City in the 90s. And, how do you think being in New York, the whole jazz scene shaped you as a musician in the beginning?
Mm, mm. Um, well, yeah, let's see. We'll start in 1990, I guess. I got to New York in 90 to attend the New School. And as I was mentioning before, I didn't know much about straight ahead jazz. I played mostly rock and funk and like fusion growing up. And so when I got to the New School, I was fortunate that I kind of fell in with a group of guys. Sam Yahel was one. We were suite mates. And another guy named Alex Graham, an alto player. And I would say they knew more about jazz than I did. And then we became friends, and then we started hanging out with some older musicians, all back slightly older. Brad Meldau was there at the time, Pete Bernstein, Larry Goldings, and so yeah, very fortunate and kind of fortuitous to have fallen into that scene. And yeah, it's just, being around those guys, we listened to a lot of records and that I would not have known about. I watched those guys play a lot. I got to play with them a bit too, which, as you know, is like kind of the, that's kind of the whole Megillah, really. If you can play with people who are on that level, it's like the rising tide lifting all the boats kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that I don't think there's been a group of musicians who are all, they're in this, New York space. There's so many of them who all come in around the same time that like all the musicians you name, plus there's a lot more of them too.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
I don't really think there's been another time where so many musicians cropped up who are all so influential. I mean, even looking, even now, let's say there's a bunch of musicians looking back, it won't be the same number. It seems like it was just such an amazing time.
Yeah, I agree. Whatever serendipity kind of had to be in place for that to happen. I felt then and feel now very, very fortunate. Probably more in retrospect. It's always, when you're in the midst of something, it's hard to know, how it's going to be viewed later. But yeah, I think that's true. And I was talking to someone about this the other day. I think that one of the other factors then was that, from what I gather, straight ahead jazz took a little bit of a hit in the 70s and 80s in terms of, just not being as popular. I think it's kind of a cyclical thing. And so I think it was late 80s, early 90s when it really came kind of roaring back. And there was this whole Young Lions.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah. I don't know who coined that, but they ran with that. And
we're talking about for those who aren't familiar, the Wynton Marsalis and Branford Marsalis, around that, Kenny Kirkland maybe.
Sure. Yeah. And then
Christian
McBride for sure. And then there was a guy named Christopher Holliday, a saxophonist, Roy Hargrove.
Right.
And Joey DeFrancesco, Jeff Keezer. The New York Times actually did a piece on this, I remember. So I remember thinking, well, okay, yeah, if it's in the New York Times, like, that's this must be pretty standard. But looking back, it's rare to have the New York Times or any major paper devote basically like an art section to this music. So I think it was that, and a lot of that kind of ignited a lot of enthusiasm, young enthusiasm for the music. Um, and so through, I feel like, the new school is like the patient X, and then for me, and then everything kind of sprung from that. I started hanging out quite a bit at Augie's, which is Augie's is turned into Smoke, but Augie's was a great place to listen and then play, and it was it was kind of a divey Columbia bar, in the same spot where Smoke is. And
Yeah, there's, in case people want to, go check this out, there's actually a documentary on YouTube.
right,
It's like it's a New York City jazz documentary, and there's shots at the Blue Note, but August is in there with Joe Farnsworth, so people can
that's
kind of
right.
go and check this out if they want to see. It looks nothing like the new venue.
No, it's maybe charmingly down market from that, or was. So the deal up there was certain musicians owned a night or nights. So it was great. And Farnsworth, speaking of Joe, was a huge influence and is a huge influence on me. And I became friends with him and also studied with him a bit. And he was invaluable for just pulling my coat to not only drum related stuff, but just music in general, and records I hadn't heard of. And so I used to go hear him. He had Fridays and Saturdays up there for many years, and he'd have, I mean, it was amazing, the musicians that had come through. He had Cecil Payne playing with him fairly often. Cecil would take the bus up from Camden, New Jersey. Cecil was actually he was basically blind, but he was coming up to play at Augie's. He'd stay at Joe's place over the weekend. And who else? Art Taylor used to come through every now and then. I believe Max Roach came there one time. I wasn't there for that, but yeah, it was just it was an interesting confluence of what, I mean, it was like a college bar that just happened to have some of the best jazz being played in New York, by some incredible musicians. So Larry Goldings and Pete and Bill Stewart had a night up there for a long time. Let's see who else. Yeah, just almost anyone you can think of. Joel Fromm played there quite a bit, and let's see, yeah, Brad played there as well, and then I ended up playing there. I subbed for Joe eventually, which was always daunting, and actually, I remember one time John Orr, the bass player, was on the gig, and Joe never told people, or that I was coming in. I just show up, and I could kind of see the look of, oh boy, who's this kid? And but I did get to play with a lot of these guys as a result, which was great. And John Orr, one of Monk's bass players, played the gig every now and then, and he was very intimidating. And he wasn't saying anything to me and wasn't really looking at me. And on the break, he said, "I have an idea," was the first thing he said to me. And I said, "I'm all ears." He said, "On my solos, maybe just don't play."
Whoa.
And yeah, and I mean, I think at the time I was a little bit taken aback, but there was a fair amount of that. Very, these guys weren't going to sugarcoat something for you, and so looking back now, it's kind of a funny story, but there were kind of countless experiences like that up there, and again, just incredibly fortunate to have fallen in there, and then to be able to sub. And then I played up there Sundays and Mondays, generally with Sam Yahel, who I mentioned earlier, on organ. And we played, it was usually me and Sam, and then he'd hire either a third and a fourth. So we played with Pete Bernstein a fair amount up there, and Joel, and Josh Redmond did it a few times. Eric Alexander, who was another huge influence and a good friend. Ryan Kaiser. So there was this whole kind of scene up there, and even on nights when people weren't playing, they'd go up, and there was a a pretty fertile, like sitting in by invite kind of thing.
It sounds like, the way you're talking about this period, that this was such an important time in your life and your development. You have all these memories and stories, and now, we're over 30 years later. When you think about it, it's pretty remarkable. And
Mm,
you have to have, a certain temperament to sustain that, career and everything, and still keep going. But these days, like, let's say in the last 5 years or so, what's exciting you the same way those days were? Like, what gigs or who you're
mm,
playing with? I'm curious about that.
mm. Yeah, good question. Uh, well, to me, it's exciting. It's always exciting that Smalls is still around and very more vibrant than ever. Smalls was another place where I really feel like I learned to play. I actually lived down the street on 10th Street when it opened. I was living with Sam, and we could play in our apartment, which was very rare, and we were playing all the time. And then Smalls opened up; it was incredible. Like we couldn't believe there was a
What's
jazz
the
club.
what's the rent there now?
Oh God, I stayed in that place for 18 years. It was a three bedroom duplex, and yeah, it was the last rent was 2,200. So I'm sure that was a while ago, but I have to think it's probably
Wait, 2,200 total.
correct.
Oh,
Correct.
wow, my God.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, yeah. So, um, and that's another part of when people ask about New York back then. I think it was a bit easier. I know it was a bit easier to be here and eke out a living as a musician, just because we divided that three ways. So, and gigs generally paid about what they pay now. Some of them. So the dollar went a lot further then, I would say. Um, but yeah, Smalls opened, and that was amazing too. So between Smalls and Augie's, there were weeks when I was playing at Smalls, 3 or 4 times, and then playing at Augie's, and it was an amazing period. But you were asking me about what excites me now. Um, Definitely to see that again, Smalls is still alive and doing very well, and that Spike also opened Mesro, which is another amazing club. Um, and I just love the aesthetic there. I love the um, Mesro. I think he modeled a bit after a club called Bradley's, which was also very like an amazing place to see music, and very intimate. And I saw a lot of great music there as well. So I think to see that there's like a continuum, you know, is great. And also Mitch, who opened Smalls back when, has opened. Everyone knows this, but Ornithology and Cafe Ornithology out in Brooklyn, and that's very exciting too, because I find when I play at those places, first of all, I'm probably twice everyone's age, but it's great to see a lot of mostly young people out to hear music. It reminds me of my days at Augie's when I was that age, um, and yeah, I just to see a lot of the younger musicians. I mean, there are so many really talented and very well versed young musicians.
Yeah, it's interesting you say, like, you're older now. I'm a little older. I'm almost 38, but last night I did a gig, and there was a jam session, and there were a bunch of other people who played guitar like me, and some, it's very obvious that some of them were younger than me, but it's like you still feel exactly always the same. I don't know what that. I
Yeah,
don't know. It's but you're thinking about the age thing, but it's a little unusual even when you get just a little bit older.
yeah, for sure. And I think it's probably mostly self perception.
Sure. Oh yeah, it's all self-perception.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, but it's. I would say that is very exciting to me. That it seems like people want to come see live jazz, which is not always the case. And some audiences are more into it than others. But I think the fact that those clubs are just doing so well, and there, as I said, a lot of young musicians, many of whom I don't know, but I think for whatever reason, um, maybe jazz education starts younger or it's better.
Well, they don't have, they have access, all the younger musicians have access to the whole world at their fingertips. They don't have to
That's
go to
true.
school. They have everything right there and then.
That's true. Yeah, I'm sure that has something to do with it.
It's the
But
technology, you know.
the technology, yeah. But I'm amazed. I've been playing a gig that actually I is one of the more fun gigs I've done in a long time. There's a place called the 11th Street Bar that has a session every Monday night. And this is a place that Barry Harris used to come and hang out, and Leroy Williams. And um, so the guy who heads it now, Richie, is an excellent piano player. He was very close with Barry. So this place is kind of steeped in that. And I started doing the gig maybe 5 months ago. And that's been great. I get to play with some of my old friends, Joe Magnarelli, Grant Stewart, who was also my roommate at one point in that same spot I was mentioning. Um, so to get to play with those guys is fantastic. And then again, they usually open it up in the middle of the gig, and I'm amazed by just the talent and and also maturity of a lot of these young musicians. It's incredible, and really inspiring to see and play with. So yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Do you have to do other gigs that aren't jazz just to keep all the, the wheels in motion in your life? Or at this point, is it, only jazz gigs? I'm just kind of curious if there's ever situations that come up where, you have, certain things you might do or not do.
Yeah, for sure. I've never been solely jazz, uh, both kind of by choice and by necessity, I would say. I mean, I used to play more like club date kind of stuff.
Right.
I didn't decide not to do that. It just kind of, I feel like I'm not as dialed in there. Um, so about 18 years ago, I got my real estate license. So I've been doing that uh, kind of part-time-ish. But between the two, it's kind of enabled me, I think, to continue to play the gigs I want to play.
No, that we'll talk off when we're not recording. I'll tell you some interesting stuff. This is like,
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but I love hearing this stuff because, like, let's just be honest here. There's going to be young jazz drummers who listen to this podcast that look up to you, and they're going to be like, they want to be doing the gigs you're doing, and they put you on such a pedestal because you're such a great player, and then you're telling me, like, on this podcast, that you have other things you do to keep the wheels in motion. I think that's great. Like to because I feel like certain musicians might hide things like that.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, when I first made the decision, this was this was around the time that I was leaving that rent stabilized apartment, so that factored in. I knew that wherever I landed next was not going to be that sweet a deal. But I was also 35. I was in my 20s and early 30s, I really didn't mind just kind of scraping by. But I started to think, it might be nice to not have to worry as much, rather. Um, so initially, I was kind of opposed to the idea and thought, I should be able to just do what I want to do, and but I'm actually fine with it, and it's brought. Well, first of all, I don't have to take every gig, which is nice. Like, I mean, if it's a gig I don't really want to do, but it pays well, I can kind of weigh that. And yeah, it's actually been of all the things to do as a side gig. It's been actually very good for me, I think.
Oh no, absolutely, and
Yeah.
it's just good to have. I mean, I think it's good to have like sort of a yin and yang in your life in that way. Something you do creatively, and also something you do just to pay the bills and have
Yep.
and keep your standard of living where you like it.
Yeah, I agree. And there's all sorts of stuff to be learned from outside of the jazz world. So, but yeah, it definitely brought a certain level of comfort, I guess. I mean, just not having to rely on gigs, which again,
do you think that I'm sorry to
no, it's okay. No, go ahead. Yeah.
Do you think other musicians, not, I mean, maybe some of them who are really, great players might look at that almost with contempt in a way? And I'm not, it could be maybe there's jealousy there because of the,
Mm.
but I mean, like we're just having a real conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Or I might even look at that like, oh, he's not, he does something else. So he's not, and you're not that at all. I'm just saying like there are
No, no, I hear
musicians
you.
who might be like that.
Um, well, I can certainly imagine that. And like I said in the beginning, I kind of went kicking and screaming, and I remember I took like half the real estate course, and just thought, you know what, this doesn't sound interesting to me at all, and I should just be able to play what I want to play. So I had kind of a false start, and then I went back and uh, I think maybe a year later, and my perspective had just changed a bit. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure to your point, there are people who feel like
And to,
you can't ever do that, and but
well, I mean, that's at least the dream I got sold when as a product of the music school and master's degree program. But I mean, like I woke up from that. But let's just say, like we're having this conversation now. Um, Lee Morgan worked as a janitor part time.
mm,
Um, McCoy Tyner worked in a parking garage. That people don't know that. Um, what's it called?
yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Uh, uh, I'm looking at. I have a whole list on my phone because I was actually, reading about this. Yeah, but there's lots of others.
Yeah,
In terms of, it's when the when the things get hard, you have to keep everything working for your family.
well, yeah, and I guess that also put some perspective on it as well. I mean, you mentioned McCoy and Lee, and those are some of the greats
Oh yeah, Wes
of the
Montgomery.
music.
Wes
Oh
Montgomery.
yeah,
He worked full time in a factory.
right, and he had to practice softly at night. Isn't that the thing with his thumb or something like
Yeah.
that?
Charles Mingus worked in a mailroom as a clerk. I have the list in front of me. This is just to share with the audience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Vernel Fournier, who I was fortunate to study with a bit at the New School, drove a cab. I know. So I mean, for me to say, why do I have to do this, given the number of amazing musicians who've done it before me? Yeah, doesn't really make much
Well,
sense. So
let's just leave that. Let's just leave that list with
yeah,
them like that. We just,
yes,
to the audience
yeah,
who's listening. But it's just all about spreading, the awareness because
sure, yeah,
we're so passionate about being jazz artists.
sure, yeah,
Um,
completely.
I also, wanted to, to talk to you, about just how things have changed in your perspective because you said the gigs still, pay about the same, everything. And there is, there is inflation going on. Are there certain places or festivals you think that the money has gone up in that way? You've seen like certain places actually grow with the times?
I was being maybe a bit hyperbolic there. Um, I guess the joke even back then was talking to in the '90s, talking to older musicians was that uh, gigs in the early '60s and '70s paid like 50 to $100, and at that time your rent could be like a couple $100. You'd make your nut in 2 gigs. So no, there's certainly gigs now that pay a bit more and have adjusted. And I have great sympathy too for or empathy rather with club owners.
Oh yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, like it's a very difficult nut to crack, and I think um, never having run one, obviously, but I know Spike well and Ian Hendrickson-Smith, who owns Uncle Chief's. I mean, the amount of moving parts and the expenses that people have no idea about is huge, and so yeah, I just think it's funny because there are still gigs out there that pay, $100, and Smalls paid $100 in 1994. So, but not all of them, obviously. Some have adjusted, and
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
that's the thing. I think people don't realize how much money it goes into to running something like that, and especially in New York City, what the rent is. Oh my God,
it's crazy. Yeah, I
they
mean,
say
it's
like people who have famous restaurateurs have multiple locations. Like, they stay in New York just to keep their presence, but it's not like they're making a tremendous amount of money. I'm telling like the Gordon Ramsays. I mean, I've heard
sure.
that before.
Yeah, very much so. Clothing stores too. I mean, it's just to keep the brand.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I, for me, I just, I know that it's. I mean, the margins are already tough in that business, no matter where you open up. But in New York, to your point, you're starting from an incredible amount of money you have to come up with each month, and every time that means every time you open your doors, you have to make X dollars, and so I get it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Joe, this has been such a fun conversation, and
yeah,
very
likewise.
enlightening for a lot of people. I'm sure will really enjoy this, and thank you for your honesty and talking about your artistry and your journey. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Abe. I really appreciate it.